Good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and faculty and students from Georgetown University, from DC, and from Qatar. Welcome to today's session. My name is Anil Khurana. I'm a professor at Georgetown University and executive director of the Baratta Center for Global Business, which is working with the Ministry of Finance and the GCC Secretariat to host this event today. We themed today's events GCC 2035, exploring the future of regionalization, global and regional industries, and trade and investments, which is intended to be a conversation around the dynamics and complexity of today's global economy and the GCC's role in the intersection of globalization and regionalization, two strong trends that we see around the world. We will have 3 panels today and 3 keynote speakers, spanning regional and global policy, industries of today and the future, and investors' perspectives, both inbound and outbound. And we start with a keynote by His Excellency Ali bin Ahmed Al Kawari, who I'd now like to invite to the stage to give his perspectives.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Esteemed fellow ministers, respected academics and experts, and distinguished guests. I'm delighted to welcome you all to participate in this unique collaboration between the GCC Secretariat and Georgetown University, which aims to galvanize our thinking in how we can work together to confront the challenges and the opportunities for the next decades. The world and our region have changed dramatically over the last decade and will change even more in the next decade in the coming years to 2035. Many of the achievements in the GCC recent years, from the formulation and implementation of national visions to the rollout of large quantities of renewable energy across several countries, might have sounded unlikely or met with skepticism a decade ago, but they are a reality now. This suggests there will be more surprises in the years to come, particularly as we grapple with rapidly evolving technologies like artificial intelligence. Our region is well placed to seize the opportunities that are being presented given a world-class infrastructure, available capital, and strong leadership. On the negative side, we have been through recent challenges such as COVID-19 pandemic and the backlash against multilateralism and trade deals. The impact of the climate change are beginning to be experienced here as in other parts of the world. Also, although the Gulf itself remains a stable region, several countries in the wider Middle East are engulfed with alarming conflicts that are harming some of our trade routes and partnership, on top of causing immense suffering to the civilians. Given these challenges, it is encouraging that partnership between the Gulf countries is at the strongest in many years. This is thanks to engagement by national leaders and substantive contribution made by the GCC Secretariat and its agencies to facilitate cooperation and support policymaking. We will need these trends to continue so that we can make the most of the coming decade for the people of the Gulf, as well as work together to support wider region and the international community. Our conference today will start with a ministerial panel to share views about how to expand our cooperation at the governmental level. It will be followed by several keynote speeches and 3 expert panels looking at how we can engage with industries of the future, that we can learn from each other's and what we can learn from each other's national vision and strategies, and how to engage with foreign investors. Thank you all for participating in these discussions, and I hope that today's event will spawn new ideas and partnership to help us seize the opportunities of the coming decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those opening remarks which sort of set the stage for the day. If I use a sports analogy, the world is a playfield with 192 countries, all competing as individual players. However, with the complexity around us, I think it's time for a team play, Team GCC, right? That's, I think, the spirit of the day, maybe. Let me now invite my colleague, Professor Raj Desai, to come to the stage along with the rest of the panel. Raj is an accomplished economist with a lot of expertise in economic reform and international development. And for the next 45 minutes or so, Your Excellencies, Ministers of Finance from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Bahrain Minister of Economy, and Her Excellency, Managing Director of IMF, please join us on the panel. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the Georgetown family from Washington and Doha, welcome. Thank you for joining us for this panel this morning and for this conference. Let me start by posing a question to the panel of ministers. May I ask the ministers that in the past several years, it's become evident that we are seeing changes in global trade patterns, greater risks of geoeconomic fragmentation. So may I ask, what challenges do you see in improving cooperation in the GCC? And how can these challenges be resolved? Start with the minister.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, GCC states have some of the most open economics in the world. Both in terms of share of trade in GDP and limited trade barriers, and engagement with wide range of trade partners. There are challenges when the global fragmentation and rivalry mean that third parties impose limits in our trade, or force us to choose between countries in a critical sectors, when we could prefer to trade neutrally. We try to balance this in a pragmatic ways. Within the GCC, we share advantages of integration that could run up against national priorities and concerns between competition. So what we are saying, here, I mean, the GCC has great advantages in terms of like unite us, instead of, separating us. Most of the world supplies of LNG and oil is coming from this part of the region. Also, we have stabilities. We have a strong governance, in our system. Fiscal, discipline is also part of our, agendas. So this makes the region is very unique and has the ability to integrate and cooperate, better than many other regions. Of course, there are competitions. And these competitions, in my opinion, is very healthy, because it, complement us. Each country has a unique advantage, and when we collect these unique advantages, we have a power that we can, to be competitive in the world. And we have seen recently attention really coming to the region here. Our biggest challenges, as I mentioned, is really, the geopolitics. This is something we're monitoring and seeing here. But in the same time, also, also the fragmentation, what we call fragmentation of the world, and, moving away from multilateralism, to nationalism. This is a big challenge, as we see, and because then we have to select partners and becomes very, very difficult. However, as I say, us here, as finance leaders, as well as with the GCC Secretariat. I think we are making the progress to make sure like we mitigate all of these risks and stay united. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj, and it's a pleasure to be here today. And I'd like to thank Kristalina and His Excellency Minister Al-Jad'an for the invitation. I would like to thank His Excellency the Minister of Finance in Qatar for hosting this important thing, and thank you for the warm welcome. Today, when we look across the GCC region, it's important to note how big the growth trajectory the region is on. Currently, GDP across the 6 countries is north of $2 trillion a year, estimated to go up to $3 trillion a year by 2030, and estimated to go up to north of $5 trillion by 2050. So it's quite a significant growth trajectory that we're on, but there's also an inflection point. If we look at the history of the region's economies, they were largely exporting natural resources and importing products and services. The transformation that is happening rapidly in this economic cycle, it started a while ago, but we're really seeing it pick up now, is the increase in the size of the non-oil economies. And then those sectors in the non-oil economies are manufacturing products, they are providing services, and therefore one of the issues around the integration is to ensure that the integration reduces the friction around goods and the friction around services, because largely when we used to speak about economic integration, we were all importing economies and had to have more like a unified importing policy. Whereas today, we are exchanging products and services, and that has been a change to the way we used to do business. And so our collective structures that have created a strong and unified economic system across the Gulf has to now evolve to reflect the changing and evolving and modernizing trade patterns. And that is one of the things that all of us as Ministers of Finance and with our colleagues, the Ministers of Commerce, and all of the relevant entities in customs, etc., have to adapt and make sure that our integrated mechanisms are fit for purpose in an evolving economic structure that we all face. And that's one of the big things we need to focus on.
السلام عليكم، مساكم الله بالخير جميعا وسعيد بوجودي في الدوحة. I'll switch to English so our English audience can understand. But I really wanted to first of all thank the Ministry of Finance of Qatar for hosting this, for the university for co-hosting this and organizing this timely event. I think as their excellencies have mentioned, GCC is uniquely positioned really to harness opportunities out of the current challenges that the global economy faces. This is in a region that really shines in a midst of series of challenges that are facing the global economy. And despite what His Excellency Al-Kawari mentioned, that there are parts of this Middle East region that are going through tough times and very unfortunate human tragedy, GCC have played a very significant role in calming down the tensions, trying to focus on its own economy and its own people, and providing support to the wider region and to the global economy at large. We have seen GCC taking very bold and serious action in diversifying their economies. They have been reliant for a long time on fossil fuel and the endowment they have. And while fossil fuel demand still very robust, it continues to suffer from fluctuations in revenues, which makes it very difficult for countries who heavily rely on one commodity to be able to actually sustainably and predictably implement their strategies. And that's why diversification is key. I mean, we see it in Qatar, and Bahrain, and Oman, and UAE, and Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, where a lot of efforts are being made to ensure that their economies are diversified. As a result of that, the IMF Outlook report of 23 clearly states that the GCC have been able to withstand the multiple shocks that the global economy have faced. Now, just focusing on the key question, I think obviously we are 6 countries with different demographies and sometimes even different priorities. And without acknowledging that, we are not going to go anywhere. So if we just say that, no, we are GCC, we are, everything is rosy and fine, you will not go anywhere. I mean, we collectively recognize that there are different national priorities, but also at the same time, there are very clear common understanding, common benefits, and definitely we all recognize, as His Excellency have mentioned, that working collectively would benefit all of us a lot better than working in silos, including on trade. And particularly when we see challenges around the world, shifting political positions, if we don't harness that tension to our benefit, I think we would lose a lot, and we recognize this, and we are very focused in making sure that collectively we reach that target.
Madam Managing Director, if I can follow up based on what the ministers have been speaking about, the minister mentioned the IMF regional outlook, and we've heard 2 themes in what has just been mentioned, the discussion of regional integration and, of course, diversification and decoupling from hydrocarbons. What role do you see for the International Monetary Fund in supporting GCC countries' efforts to do that?
Thank you very much for having me on this panel. I'm in the 3rd day of my 2nd term as a managing director of the IMF. And symbolically, I think being right here in the Gulf is the right place to be. Because what we see at IMF here in the Gulf countries is what we would like to see all over the world. A relentless pursuit of reforms that bring transformation of economies and make them more resilient to shocks that come, and also very serious attention to inclusive growth, making sure that the young people in the Gulf have prospects for their future. Just 2 points of reference. One is on diversification. We have seen tremendous shift towards non-hydrocarbon sectors. In Saudi Arabia, we just talked with the minister, from 30% to over 50%. We look at Oman, 60-65%. We look at UAE, 75%, and Bahrain holds the record for now, 85%. And the second one is what happens within the Gulf. From being outward-oriented only, in other words, trade with the rest of the world, more and more countries are integrating. And just one number, in the 80s, trade within the Gulf countries was meager, $3 to $4 billion. Now it is over $70 billion and growing. So what we see is reform-minded leadership, pursuing transformation, pursuing relentlessly this diversification of the economy, but also looking towards making the Gulf stronger. What is the role of the IMF? What we do for this region, as we do for the rest of our membership, is threefold. One, deepen reforms and provide learning experience, be a transmission line of lessons from one place to another, especially reforms in the fiscal area, and of course looking at new risks on the horizon and how to build resilience towards these risks. I want to thank Saudi Arabia. We now have a regional center in Riyadh to bring the countries together and to bring experience from these countries to the rest of the world. Second, we work very hard on making sure that capital markets in the Gulf get deeper and deeper, and that capital markets in the Gulf are more integrated, so they can be a force for this engine of diversification in the region. And three, very important for us, we bring the voice of the Gulf in terms of pushing back on protectionism. These countries are naturally with the mentality of trade is good for everybody. And what in a world where we see a bit of retrieval away from multilateralism, it is fantastic to have the Gulf and the voice of the Gulf. Minister Al-Jadani is the chair of the IMFC, our governing committee, and we have UAE chairing the development committee of the World Bank. Very good to have that kind of leadership for multilateralism in place. I want to finish by saying that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people don't go to the Gulf to learn how to run their economies. People from the Gulf go to other places. That has changed. Now we come to the Gulf to learn from you. 4 of the 30 most competitive economies today are Gulf states. 3 of them are right here next to me, and the 4th one sits in the audience, UAE. That dynamism and that sense that we have to work together in the world we live in is what you bring, and we at the IMF transmit that to the rest of our membership.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Lots to think about. But rather than continue here, I think to move things along, we will open the panel, with the permission of the members of the panel, to some questions from the audience. Please identify yourself, and in the interest of time, please try to be brief.
We don't charge money for answering questions for a change.
And in particular, if you wish to direct your question to any member of the panel, please say so. Well.
That seems to be a very shy audience. Not that shy. Here is a question.
Thank you very much for having us. I'm Frederick Mwansa from Georgetown University. I think it's tremendous the amount of capital expenditure that the Gulf countries have poured into the shift towards renewable energy. As this success has sort of happened, are there any key challenges that the leaders we have here are seeing for the next 10 years, and how do your governments plan to sort of like combat those challenges?
Thank you. I mean, it's very difficult when we are sitting here where oil or hydrocarbon is the main source of our revenue, and to answer a question on renewables. But I will try to address that. No, I mean, sustainability is at the core of our strategies, and if I may speak even on behalf of my colleagues, in the GCC here, because we are coordinating these activities. So every single country, strategies, you will see the sustainability at the core heart, of our strategies. And, we are a responsible, energy suppliers for the world. It's very important we understand that as we go to a fully renewable situation, transit energies, has to be there and has to be supported. And this is the role we are playing today, to provide the world with a transit source of energy that will help to reach, the sustainability goals and the net zero, situation. This is one side of it. At the same time, efforts are being done, in many countries. I can start speaking about Qatar, solar energies, for example. By 2030, we already, our Ministry of Energy, they announced, 30% of the power generated in Qatar is going to come from solar. And this is a huge investment we are doing. Also, huge efforts has been done, in the decarbonization and carbon capture projects, under the way. And, this is another thing. Even, going beyond energy itself, even in the finance, in the Ministry of Finance, for example, of Qatar, we have created a green financing framework, and we have issued the first ever, in the region, sovereign green bond, just recently to support, green development. So the commitment there, and we think the GCC itself is going to be very critical to the transformation and the achievement of the targets reaching there. The only thing, the one caveat I will say, and probably His Excellency Al-Jad'an will share the view, I think when we talk about, sustainability and net zero, I think we need to be realistic in our targets. What we have seen in the past, yes, the aspiration is there. Everybody's, we are seeing the climate change and the effect of it. But I think we need to be realistic when we set the target dates and everything. At some point, we felt like, it was pushed aggressively, for a shorter dates, which was going to put a pressure, on the economic development, on the inflation. And we have seen that. I think so now we need really to rationalize our goals and move in a realistic ways and put in a realistic aspirations and targets for net zero situations and to reach, the environmental sustainability goals. Thank you.
I think this is very, very important question. And throughout, actually, the GCC, significant investments are made in renewables. And as in hydrocarbon, I can tell you we are providing the cheapest renewables in the world. So our production cost by the private sector of renewables is the cheapest. Then, what does that mean? That means basically we will continue the journey of investing heavily on renewables, but at the same time we are investing on the base energy to make sure that the world is supplied with energy until there is enough renewables in the world. The key challenge on the renewable side is how can you actually export it? And the current basic mean of exporting it, at least scientifically, is through hydrogen, and green hydrogen particularly, or blue hydrogen with sequestration. But then the cost is still very prohibitive. And nobody wants to buy from you if you produce hydrogen, although we have now started the largest hydrogen plant in the world in Neom in Saudi Arabia, which will be commissioned next year. Still, the customers are very shy from buying hydrogen from Saudi Arabia or from elsewhere because the cost is quite high. But we became also creative. So instead of actually exporting energy purely directly, we can actually export proxies of energy. So we are now bringing data centers into Saudi Arabia, data centers and Bahrain and UAE and other countries in the region. Data centers consume significant amount of energy, And instead of actually exporting the energy, we will fuel these data centers with renewables and then export data so that these data centers will be connected worldwide and can be used wherever you are. So instead of actually directly exporting energy, you could find alternatives such as what we are doing in the data centers. I'll stop there.
If I just want to add one thing, and in addition to what His Excellency Minister Kouari and His Excellency Minister Al-Jad'an mentioned, one of the things that's unique to this region is when we look at what's driving our push towards renewables, and you look at where it's coming from, there is an additional dynamic that's very much a feature of this region, which is as hydrocarbon exporters, the benefit of substituting hydrocarbon consumption with renewable consumption means that you can then go on and sell that hydrocarbon. So it's very close to the source. We end up linking that benefit of renewable energy substitution is something that we pick up very, very quickly and see the benefit of very quickly. And that's why you find that ministries of finance in the region are big supporters of renewable energy, because the financial benefit is there from a very practical perspective. In addition to the point that His Excellency Minister Al-Jad'an made in terms of the challenge of how do you export it once you're producing more than your local need, and of course, given that there's huge economies of scale when you're deploying renewable energy or capital into renewable energy, you need to build huge scale. Hopefully you build more than your local consumption. Then how do you export that? That is certainly a challenge. The other challenge is the rapid development of technology in the space today means that when you're doing big capital deployments, you're looking at things with a capital deployment cycle and wondering whether or not that technology will be obsolete or still be relevant. That is one of the challenges that we always find when we're looking at the projects and we're looking at the scale of the projects at a time when the technology is developing so rapidly. One of the things that we constantly have to ask ourselves is, will this technology be relevant even in 5 years' time, or 2 years' time, or 20 years' time? So it's difficult to guess, but that is another practical consideration that does pose its own challenge.
Great question. We know that the world is not moving fast enough on decarbonization. We know that if we take all the pledges of all the countries during this decade, we will fall between 25 and 50% short of what is necessary to decarbonize. So taking aggressive actions in this decade is so very important, because the more we delay, the more expensive it becomes. And I want to reinforce what we heard from Minister Al-Jad'an of the critical significance of renewable energy for the new economy based on artificial intelligence. And I so much welcome that there is this thinking that the Gulf can be an integrated place for the provision of data centers based on your expansion of renewable energy. And if I have one suggestion for the ministers here is think together of how you present your business proposition on transforming your economies for a world of artificial intelligence. If you go alone, each country on its own, risk is it would be costlier, and maybe you would not achieve the critical mass for competitive positioning in this new world, this new economy. And if you go together, then I think the benefits for you and the rest of the world would be tremendous.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, for the very insightful remarks. My name is Hashim Krayem. I am a PhD student at Georgetown's Department of Government. My question relates actually to the transition away from a hydrocarbon-reliant economy. I want to pick up on something that His Excellency Sheikh Salman Al Khalifa has said about reducing frictions in goods and services. So attracting talent, especially a high-skilled workforce, is a key element to that, and it also features into the Qatari National Vision of 2030. Do you foresee maybe facilitating, free movement of labor between GCC countries? What I'm thinking of is something more like a GCC visa, similar to approaches in the EU, where high-skilled workforce can actually, transition between countries and work for different firms, which would also facilitate knowledge transfer, as was noted by Her Excellency, the Managing Director of the IMF. Thank you very much.
So I believe the Minister and the Managing Director may have to depart for other business, so please join me in thanking these two members of the panel, and we can continue with the rest until our time is up. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hashim, for that question. And it is absolutely the case that when we look at how to reduce friction and make sure that we are a proper economic unit, that definitely when it comes to skilled workforce and ability for skilled workforce to move within this economic unit and any frictions around that needs to be addressed. And it's relevant in all spheres. All businesses are people businesses. Even factories are people businesses. And certainly in services sectors such as financial services and consulting and all sorts of areas, it is important to have that. There have been many initiatives early on with regards to local labor force being able to move around in a frictionless manner, and those work very well. So within the GCC citizens have a lot of freedom to work in all 6 countries. And absolutely, when it comes to looking forward, that's currently being done for tourism, for example. So unified tourism visas or joint tourism visas is something that has already been actioned. And when it comes to workforce and labor force, it's something that certainly needs to be taken into consideration in the future. And that's a very good point, and something that will have to factor into us making it a proper economic unit where people move in. Thank you.
Why don't we take a last round of questions, and we should collect a few, please.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First, I want to thank Minister Al-Kawari for inviting the Islamic Development Bank to participate in this very important gathering. My question partly was to Kristalina, but now the chairman of the IMFC of the IMF will have to be put on the spot. Maybe he can reflect on that. This region, as was mentioned by all the ministers and by Kristalina, has been opening up significantly in terms of its own diversification internally and in terms of its global trading outlook. And its economies are really growing and flourishing because of that openness. Unfortunately, globalization seems to be retreating globally. And multilateralism seems to have become almost a bad word. And therefore, for the global economy to be really in sync with what's happening in the GCC, and for the GCC to be able to continue to flourish under this global economic system, what is it that the IMF, being the guardian of the global economic system, can do to really prevent that curtailment of trade and to enhance that and deepen it in the rest of the world so the GCC can really achieve all its aspirations that are very well expressed in the vision systems that have been produced in all of the GCC countries? Thank you.
Very good. Let's take perhaps 2 more questions in this round.
Thank you so much for your time. I'm Kayla. I'm a finance undergrad student at Georgetown. I think the growth of the sports industry in the Gulf Coast has really captured the attention of the world, and I'd love to hear your perspective on where you see that industry going in your countries. Thanks.
Right. Here.
Hello, thank you so much. My question is about private sector development and ensuring nationals are participating in the development of the private sector. This is a top priority for countries in the region, and I'd like to know, in your perspective, what are the main challenges to building a robust private sector and having local participation in the private sector, and what are the key policies that are needed to overcome these challenges? Thank you.
So we have a question about the challenges facing the GCC in an era of deglobalization, a question about sports, sports promotion, and a question about the growth of the private sector.
I didn't hear the question about, I think the second question, but I'll try to cover very quickly His Excellency's comments. Although I am not the IMF spokesperson, but as the IMFC chair, I can say clearly the IMF is very, very clear on its position of supporting multilateralism, globalization, and free trade. And I strongly believe that free trade, trade movements, and globalization, multilateralism benefits countries around the world. And the fragmentation in whatever form we take would likely cause quite serious loss on GDP growth globally, and will likely also cause serious inflation, and would likely also cause lack of spending efficiency across the globe. That said, I am actually not as pessimist as a lot of people are. I think despite the fact that we have seen significant media coverage from 2018 until now about global fragmentation, in reality, there is actually an increasing global trade. The difference is that, trade between certain countries may have reduced, but that has been replaced with trade between other countries and opportunities created for other countries to replace the falling trade or between other countries. That said, we are steadfast in the GCC, but also in the IMF, to try and promote trade, promote multilateral institutions, and making sure that institutions like the IMF is kept as the right fora for adversaries to be able actually to have a mature discussion and resolve their issues. On GCC growth, there are very clear sectors which are actually contributing significantly to the growth in GCC. And I'll name few without any order of priority. Tourism is an area where we are seeing an incredible growth. And the beauty of that is not only it is causing a growth in infrastructure and capital projects, but also creating significant amount of jobs. And that is an area of focus, and that is an area that we are actually driving collectively, I think, throughout the GCC. The second is financial services, with each of us having its own vision that is largely really coordinated, you need a very strong financial sector to support these visions. And you could see very clearly that the financial sector within the GCC is growing in a very healthy way. We have, just in Saudi Arabia alone, one of the largest capital markets in the world. And that is needed if you need to continue your growth trajectory. In relation to private sector, I think if you read each of the visions documents of the GCC countries, you will see that the key focus is private sector-led economy and supporting basically businesses, SMEs. And again, I'll just take an example. I'm sure other GCC countries have similar experiences. In Saudi Arabia, the SMEs have actually doubled, literally doubled in the last 5 years. And what is even more interesting is 45% of SMEs are owned by women. So empowering half of the society will give you significant growth potential. I'll stop there if you want to comment, Sheikh Salman.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and I'll just talk about the private sector first. As His Excellency mentioned, governments know that you have to nurture the private sector, you have to have a private sector-led economy, you have to. One of the things that is important is that we have to always remember that what the government's role is in nurturing the private sector is to create fertile soil and then support people to grow within that fertile soil. So over-planning it sometimes has its issues. So what you need to do is you need to actually leave the private sector to blossom on its own by providing the fertile soil, which includes the right regulations, the right infrastructure, and to simplify the procedures so people can have access to getting their permits, access to capital, etc. And those are all elements of the fertile soil. And then you need to ensure that you're also providing support for people to grow within that. Through training, through upskilling opportunities, and through good education systems. And that becomes the way in which you can drive the blossoming of the private sector within that soil. And in addition to that, another accelerator or turbocharger that can be added is a few strategic projects. And when I say a few strategic projects, yes, they need to be big, they need to have impact in terms of the GDP, and they need to be sized to the size of the economy. So you sprinkle that soil that you've got for the private sector, and you've given people the tools and skills they need to work with in that soil, and then you turbocharge it with some strategic projects and a focus on that. And we've seen, for example, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the scale at which the turbocharging projects to provide the private sector have really had a positive impact on the economy. And the Kingdom of Bahrain, we do that as well. We identify a list of strategic projects, we ensure that those are going well, and then we do that. But again, I will come back to, once you've done all of that, the next job of the government is to get out of the way. And just get out of the way of the private sector and let them get on with what they're doing, and just make sure that people are, not doing bad things. That's the limit of where we need to be. There was a question about sports, I think. Kayla mentioned the sports development in the region. It's a very important sector and a very important industry because it has huge community benefits as well. And it's important to focus on ensuring that what we are doing is we are doing things that have continued benefit for the region, and that are upgrading upgrading the infrastructure to cope with those. But it's interesting when you look at some of the impacts long term. And if I go back 20 years ago, Bahrain hosted its first Formula One race. And that is an annual event that creates its own annual economic activity over a long period of time. At the time it was done, it was a huge logistical challenge for the Kingdom of Bahrain to have to upgrade quite a lot of infrastructure to just do that one race in 2004. Today we have 4 races in the Gulf: Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, Jeddah, and Doha. And we can see the benefit of an ecosystem that had been created. And then from there you spill on into even manufacturing certain components. And we have a few factories that have come to Bahrain from international companies that are working in that field. And then you get local participation and a local interest with regards to motorsport. And you give path to young members of the community to participate positively. And that is the same with football. That's the same, which is the global sport and the regional sport. That is the same with many other endeavors. And it's important that it becomes part of the process and part of the community. And that's how we really benefit from it, in addition to the economic benefits which we see. Thank you.
Excellencies, thank you. I have promised to keep the panel to the time schedule, so please join me in thanking the ministers and Managing Director in absentia. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj, Your Excellencies, and all of you for a great discussion here. I mean, I saw a mix of logic, passion, but also honesty in the discussion. And we'll build on that during the rest of the day. May I now invite Dean Safwan Masri from Georgetown University to come and welcome us all for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, and the 25 Hoyas that we have with us here today, the students from Georgetown University, whom I'm delighted to welcome to Doha. When the GCC was founded in 1981, it might have seemed improbable, even far-fetched, to think that we would be here today in Doha talking about the Gulf's leadership in renewable energy, artificial intelligence, and media. Back then, the region was largely defined by its vast oil reserves and strategic geopolitical position. But impossible has always just meant not yet discovered. And today, we are no longer limited by the narratives of the past. The world is witnessing the Gulf emerge as a hub of innovation and culture. I see this evolution daily at Georgetown University in Qatar, in the enthusiasm of our students who are reimagining the future with new perspectives, in the enthusiasm of the government of Qatar, which never settles for anything less than transformative change. Every day, I am reminded that Qatar and this region is now defined by its capacity to become a global force in industries that shape tomorrow. As Madam Georgieva stated, the world is learning from this region. When Georgetown decided to establish its campus in Qatar nearly 2 decades ago, it was a commitment to a vision of the GCC as a crossroads for global thought and influence. We came here because we saw the region as more than an economic powerhouse. We saw it as a place where conversations lead to action, partnerships transcend borders, and bold ideas take root and thrive. Today's conference continues that legacy. Universities are, by their nature, conveners. We bring people together across diverse fields and perspectives to explore complex questions that defy simple answers. A recent example of this is Georgetown University in Qatar's Hiwarat conference series, which leaves no stone unturned in tackling the most challenging regional and global issues. Our role is to cultivate a platform where impactful discussions take place and where diverse voices shape the agendas that will guide us forward. Georgetown and Qatar Foundation have embraced this role with a shared commitment to excellence. Our work ensures that universities, in collaboration with governmental and private sector partners, stay at the forefront of generating knowledge that is both cutting edge and grounded in the lived experiences of the communities we serve. This aim to be locally integrated, yet globally engaged, is why coming together now is so important. The world around us is increasingly interconnected and interdependent, and so are our challenges. From unending regional crises that dominate the headlines to global issues like climate change and economic instability, we are reminded daily of how deeply intertwined our futures are. Our success in navigating these complexities depends on our ability to collaborate, innovate, and build resilient systems that turn adversity into opportunity. So the real question is not whether we can redefine the region's future. We know we can. The question is whether we will. The GCC has an extraordinary opportunity to lead globally by identifying and incubating solutions that resonate far beyond our region. Today's panels will bring together industry leaders and policymakers to explore how the GCC, with its diverse economies and shared ambitions, can enhance its global investment presence and forge strategic partnerships that elevate its regional and international influence. I urge you to approach these discussions with a healthy dose of skepticism and optimism in equal measure. Challenge assumptions, embrace contradictions, and remember that innovation often thrives where certainties break down. After all, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Thank you. Now, to set the stage for today's discussion, I'm honored to introduce His Excellency Hassan Al-Thawadi, Secretary General of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, in a special keynote fireside chat moderated by Dr. Anil Khurana and Georgetown University in Qatar Professor Gerd Noneman. His Excellency Al-Thawadi's reflections will set the stage for the rest of today, inspiring us to think creatively about the role of leadership in achieving regional aspirations. Please welcome His Excellency Hassan Al-Thawadi, Anil Khurana, and Gerd Noneman. Thank you.
I would get up. How are you? It's been a while. Yeah. Good to see you, my friend. That's a very good analogy. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So we heard a little bit about sports during the day. I gave an analogy. I think His Excellency Mr. Al-Jadaan mentioned the importance of sports. Bahrain Minister mentioned the importance of sports. Your Excellency, first of all, congratulations on a very successful FIFA 2022.
Thank you.
Many of us perhaps attended that World Cup. Well organized. Clearly, we had a great tournament as well. Qatar played well, aside from the overall play.
Not as well as we would have wanted.
Well, I know.
Let's speak honestly. I mean, if we're going to be speaking to everybody here, let's be very honest. We didn't play as well as we wanted to, but it was a great footballing tournament.
That's right. But one of his brothers, Saudi Arabia, actually beat Argentina.
Yes.
Ultimate winner, right? And
Well, I mean, Saudi, I think the, not to sidetrack, but I think Saudi Arabia's victory over Argentina really ignited the tournament.
That's right.
Before that, maybe some of the matches that happened, people thought, yes, it might have been expected results, but that just ignited it. And then since then, you've had, it's safe to say in terms of numbers as well as emotions, probably the most exciting football tournament in history as of today. And I will say this with a little bit of pride and hubris maybe, probably ever.
Indeed, indeed. So what's the view of the legacy that the tournament has created for Qatar and more broadly the region and also the experience of hosting the event?
That's a very open-ended question.
Well,
I'll try to be, I speak a lot, so at any moment in time, please stop me. I mean, look, the legacy, to be able to speak about the legacy, I think it's important to go back to the actual vision and the goals that were set from the very beginning. And you measure your success, whether you achieve them or not, on the goals. So when we bid to host the World Cup, our view is very simple. We looked at it as a vehicle to allow, one, the country to achieve its overall objectives in terms of overall development. So we mapped out the ability of the World Cup to serve as an accelerant and a catalyst against the Qatar National Vision 2030. Human development, environmental sustainability, economic diversification, and social development. And so we looked at how can, the World Cup itself serve as a catalyst and as an accelerant for a lot of these initiatives. At the same time, making sure that we adhere to one very important principle, never imposing unnecessary requirements out of the tournament on the country. So when we're talking about capital infrastructure, never requiring capital infrastructure specific for the tournament, other than maybe tournament specific, which is stadiums, for example, but never imposing unnecessary transportation requirements or anything else of the sort. So as not to remain with white elephants. So from day one, legacy of the country was at the forefront of our mind, looking at how can it help achieve all the different streams that the country had planned. That was one aspect. The other aspect, of course, again, this tournament from day one was never a Qatari tournament. It was always a regional, a GCC, Arabic, Middle Eastern tournament, first and foremost. And the idea was how can we work towards achieving, accelerating initiatives to create, what would potentially, hopefully, at the time we were, and we're still very ambitious about it, maybe a unified Arab market, at least when it comes to sporting industry and sporting events or major tournament events. So the idea was always focused on that. I'm very happy to say, apart from, of course, the technical requirements that were put in place, every promise we made in 2009, it's safe to say that we ticked it off in 2022. By the end of 2022, we were able to achieve every promise we made upon ourselves. More importantly, 2 years later, when you look at the legacy, if you look in terms of the specific legacy specific to Qatar, capital infrastructure today, you have probably some of the best infrastructure in the world. If you're looking at it in terms of human capability and operational capability, again, with a lot of humility, but being also realistic, we are probably, I'd say, one of the top 5 nations in the world when we're hosting major events. We were able to, host a tournament that was complex in many ways. And today, when you see and again, maybe I'm throwing a little bit of egg at certain host nations. I won't lie to you, but generally speaking, you're seeing a lot of host nations in recent tournaments have had issues that a lot of countries previously had seen us or doubted our ability as a result of the same issues that they face today. So in terms of human capability, operational capability, again, at the highest standard. More importantly, though, I think one of the greatest legacies that remains till this day, when I said it was a tournament for the Arab world, I meant, and we achieved it, it was the Arab world welcoming the world on Qatari soil. It went beyond that. Apart from the fact that you had Arab pride and Arab presence by the thousands and tens of thousands in Qatar, the fact that you had Morocco in the quarterfinals and the semifinals, that in itself is an achievement I think that the entire Arab world had a lot of pride in. As we said, Saudi Arabia was able to kickstart and ignite the tournament in a very exciting way. But more importantly, it was the Arab diaspora. Traveling throughout the world, meeting people from different parts of the world today, everybody that I see talks about their pride in this tournament. And their pride means they felt a sense of ownership in what we were able to achieve.
Yeah.
And that, for me, is probably one of the greatest legacies that I can say came out of it. Everybody realized that our part of the world not only has the right to be audaciously ambitious, but has the capability of achieving that ambition.
Right. So if I build on your comments, a couple of themes there. One is doing such a tournament successfully couldn't have been easy. You and the Supreme Committee faced a series of challenges over the years, various kinds. I'll let you elaborate on those. But now with that experience behind you, how would you advise, let's say, Morocco 2030 co-host, Saudi Arabia 2034, as they plan their activities and their successful hosting of the tournaments?
I mean, if I was to summarize, obviously there's a lot of details in terms of the challenges that we faced, but if I was to summarize, generally speaking, the challenges that we faced, I'd summarize it in the following. One, you had a tournament that was 12 years ahead. So there was a big issue in terms of making sure that the entire stakeholder, especially when it came to capital infrastructure development, and building operational capability in a nation that hadn't hosted a tournament as significant as the World Cup. How do you manage the two? How do you build the capabilities while realizing that there's no rehearsal like the World Cup itself? How do you also get all the relevant stakeholders to all move in the same direction, whether it's in terms of infrastructure development, whether it's in terms of legislation, whether it's in terms of capitalizing on this opportunity and exploiting this opportunity economically, fiscally, socially, and so on. So that was one significant challenge that we faced. And the other challenge, and again, like I said, having the operational know-how and capability of being able to host a tournament, especially keeping in mind that our tournament has no blueprint. Most other tournaments had a very simple blueprint. Our tournament was a first in every way conceivable, including the operating model and how FIFA delivered the tournament itself. Previously, FIFA always had the local organizing committee responsible to deliver the tournament. In 2026 and onwards, it's FIFA itself that delivers the tournament. In 2022, it's the only time when it was Qatar and FIFA jointly for the tournament itself delivering the tournament. The Compact World Cup, the concept of the Compact World Cup. So there was a lot of firsts. So we had to develop this capability over 12 years with a know-how, again, how do you get people motivated? How do you get people focused? How do you have that blueprint in place? These were the main challenges that we faced, or the main two challenges that we faced in terms of delivering the tournament. And I think the main area that the main advice I would give is from day one, we realized that this was a national event. It was not a standalone event. This was the country's event. We realized that, so everybody looked at it, the simplest way I describe it is it was a lighthouse or a North Star, and you just kept pushing people towards the same direction. You kept motivating people towards the same direction. You kept people understanding what it meant. But of course, 12 years ahead is a long time. So you had to break that down in terms of small little achievements in between. Whether it's hosting friendly matches, whether it's hosting tournaments, Club World Cups, opening ceremonies for stadiums. You just had to keep people motivated so that they're still excited for a tournament that faced a third challenge, which was also a very significant challenge, which was a global campaign that had many objectives. I'd say the first one was there was cynicism towards our capability in being able to host this event, being able to pull off this event for many different fronts. That global campaign also put a dark cloud on a lot of things that you wanted to achieve. A lot of people, for example, would be demotivated. Can we do it? Can we not do it? So you had to make sure that basically everybody's morale was all moving towards the same direction. The challenges that we faced ended up becoming stepping stones and motivators for us to be able to overcome whatever was put or thrown at our side.
Thank you. And by the way, audience questions are welcome in the next few minutes. Gert, do you have a question?
Not so much a question as first of all, I was absolutely delighted to have this occasion because it's been too long since we met, right? And so it is a wonderful opportunity. I have to say, I mean, I remember well the times when we, in a sense, worked together before the World Cup, leading up to it, because Georgetown, as many people might not know, was actually involved in one of the most interesting examples of both skills building and what you're saying about this was meant to be for the whole Arab world. There was setting up of an academy, really, and a training program at all levels that was meant to bring people from across the Arab world here, from various footballist associations and so on, and then skill them up, train them in various programs, and then send them back to get more experience, and then come back to deliver it when the time was actually at hand. I thought that was an amazing idea, and it showed that this, what Qatar was saying, what you were just saying, this was meant to be for the Arab world as a whole, an Arab World Cup, was true in this very, very important respect. And that academy called Jusur then went on from strength to strength afterwards. And so I'm very proud that Georgetown was a part of that at the beginning. Another thing I think you put very well is that this was a national project. It was not about just spending excessively on a World Cup. There's nothing that irritates me more than this old canard that comes up time and again. Oh, the Qataris spent 220 billion on a World Cup, isn't it awful? And I keep saying, guys, you know, the actual expense on the World Cup specifically was perhaps 12 billion or something, which is...
24 if you include the operations as well.
Yeah. Which is pretty much in line with World Cups as they go. The rest was part of the national project, right? But so I've got a couple of questions that link to some of the things that were being discussed. One is this idea of a legacy in terms of what else did it bring along? So this idea that you have this as part of your overall diversification strategy, amongst other things, right? So you attract investment, hopefully, you attract private sector activity, you attract visitors, and maybe there's a crossover to other sectors. How successful has that been, or may it be? Or is it turning out the way you had hoped?
Just one word on Jusur. I always like to bring this up. The current Saudi FA president, Yasser al-Mishal, was or actually participated in some of the courses that Jusur had launched. So Jusur's impact, throughout the Arab world, as you said, is well and truly felt. Going back towards the legacy, I think it has. I mean, if you look at the more immediate beneficiary in terms of industry for major tournaments is always the tourism industry. That's where people look at, has it actually impacted or not? Today, the numbers, I believe a few days ago, the numbers have been released. Just for 2024, there's been about a 20 billion rial spend in the tourism industry. There's been about 3 million visitors up until the third quarter of this year. I think that's, I can't remember exactly what percentage, but it's a significant increase from where it was previously. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we were looking at 2027, I think, to reach 4 million visitors. So the fact that we were able to achieve that number, or close to that number, in the third quarter of 2024, factoring in that the significant uptick when it comes to tourism and visitors is coming up in the months to come, says a lot in that regards. In terms of industry-wise, I would say this. I mean, today, I'm very proud to say that, the world, Qatar's been on the map for many different reasons throughout, the last 30, 40, 50 years. But the World Cup has definitely brought it, let's say, to the average Joe's mindset. More importantly today, when we're talking about hosting major sporting events, when we're talking about the sporting industry, moving towards the entertainment industry, the world knows Qatar now. There's no need to sit down and present yourself and provide that presentation. Having said that, there's also the infrastructure that's in place today. There's a significant acceleration in terms of a lot of the fiscal and general legislation and policies. So Qatar, I think, is in a situation today where it's a plug and play, where there's a lot of things already set to attract a lot of the industries into Qatar, whether it's in terms of tourism, whether it's in terms of transportation and logistics, and so on. So I think, to a large extent, if you look at the knock-on effect of what the World Cup has been able to achieve, yes, it's achieved that as well. The more immediate, the more direct beneficiary, like I said, the tourism, but even if you go beyond that, the indirect one is benefiting out of that as well.
Maybe just one quick follow-up question. There was incredible energy in Qatar, right? I mean, I thoroughly loved the experience of the World Cup in all the ways that you said. And the energy was linked also to the achievement of Vision 2030 and development overall, infrastructural development and so on. And business energy, right? Domestic and foreign. Since the end of the World Cup, things kind of, that energy seemed to dissipate to an extent, and we all felt a little bit bereft almost, right? But you also hear some of the businesses, foreign and domestic, that kind of sense of, okay, so what's next? So do you get a sense that that dip is now past? And what do you see happening next?
Look, I think it's important to highlight, by the way, that dip is normal. Mm-hmm. Any major nation that hosts major events, especially an event as significant as the World Cup, even more so than the Olympics, by the way, but any major event, there's always that natural dip. Mm-hmm. Qatar maybe felt it a bit more acutely for one simple reason. If you look at all major nations that hosted it, especially the last three nations, right? If you look at Russia, Brazil, South Africa, major nations, significant nations, the World Cup, when they're hosted throughout different cities. And when you're in those cities, all of us who've attended the World Cups, there's a center of gravity within that city. If you go towards it, you feel the World Cup celebration. If you shift a bit out of it, out of that vicinity, it's more like business as usual. In Qatar, because of the nature of the compact World Cup, every corner of Qatar was that vibe. It was that energy. Mm-hmm. The build-up over the last 13 years had that coming through, and you had that, crescendo coming up gradually. You had the big event itself, the Big Bang, and it was truly invigorating in an unprecedented way, because as I said, most tournaments, as the tournament starts progressing, it gradually starts slowing down, and it gradually starts reducing in terms of the excitement. It didn't happen with Qatar. Every corner you go to, and especially if you went to Souq Waqif, which the Argentinians made as their actually everybody made it as their go-to place. It was a celebration and a festival and a carnival on a daily basis. So it's only natural for you to find the disparity between that and then when next day everybody leaves and life goes back to normal, you feel that drop happening. Of course, again, keeping in mind it was an extensive, intensive progress for 13 years. A lot of the capital projects already got delivered. So it's only natural for that dip to happen, but that dip was not something that was crippling. I mean, obviously a lot of people do, look at it and had the expectation that it was going to be a big boost from the very beginning, but that's not the case. But if you look at, as I said today, the simplest fact when you look at the tourism numbers themselves indicate that there is that shift. Mm-hmm. There is that push that came into play. That's one significant aspect of it. And I think today, on the wider scale of things, we're still hosting major sporting events. We just hosted the Asian Cup earlier this year. We're hosting a number of different tournaments by the end of this year, whether it's the Club World Cup, a few, I think it's the Super, we've got one of the, we're hosting one of the Supers coming up. There's a number of different matches. There's a lot of, within the entertainment industry, a lot of events that are happening. We've got the FIBA World Basketball Championship coming up in 2027. We've got the Asian Cup coming. So there's a lot of major events that are coming into play that themselves also can serve as accelerants and as momentum drivers for within at least the industry that I was involved in previously when it comes to the event industry. Now, of course, there's offshoots to these industries now. What I can talk about is the ones that I'm more specifically involved in. Anything else should have been the Minister of Finance or somebody else at a higher pay grade than me. But if you're looking, for example, at the entertainment industry today, and maybe even the sporting industry, because I saw earlier in the session, somebody asked about the sporting industry in the region. I mean, today, and even actually about within the tourism, if you look at the trend that's happening globally, sentiment seems to be, to a large extent, shifting from the traditional markets. Let's take tourism to start off with. Today there's a number of traditional markets that worked very hard over the last 20 years to attract tourism, that there's a very strong national sentiment against that industry. I mean, we've all seen what's happening, for example, in Spain. We've heard, for example, Portugal, that worked very hard on the golden visa, is actually now taking back steps towards the golden visa. You've got also the same sentiment seems to be creeping throughout other countries. And funnily enough, the minister, I believe, from Saudi Arabia, I think the finance minister from Saudi Arabia mentioned it, the tourism industry in our part of the world is building up. And that shift, I think, again, with a lot of the initiatives that have been undertaken, whether it's the World Cup, that has shed a light on what's happening within the region. That's been a booster for a lot of what's happening within Saudi. Of course, Dubai's always been there, Bahrain. There's a big shift towards, where the different countries are working on the tourism industry to pick up on a lot of that, I believe, surplus or overflow of tourism from within, the traditional markets, which is, let's say, the European and Mediterranean market specifically. On the entertainment industry, if you look at, for example, what's happened in Korea, specific example, the Korean film industry has flourished in an unprecedented way. Netflix just recently, I think, invested about 2.5 billion further in terms of Korean content. Korean content travels, and it's, I think, one of the biggest exports of the Korean film industry. I've always said this, and we see it today in the Arab world, but Arab, let's say, storytelling is part of our tradition. It's part of our culture for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It is part of our DNA, and more importantly, if you look at our culture of storytelling from Morocco all the way down towards the Gulf, we have stories that are easily translatable and easily consumable to the rest of the world, right? Our cultures, in one way or the other, touch different cultures all over the world, whether it's South America, whether it's America, whether it's Europe, and yet up until today, we have not been able to see a single product coming out of the Arab world that competes with the Korean film industry, for example, or even, when we're looking at music, for example, Afrobeats makes its presence, but we're still not able somehow to find an Arab hit globally, right? There's a few hits that might come out. Shab Khalid maybe here, Amr Diab maybe the Grammy, 20, 30, 40 years ago, but there's nothing really present as an industry that actually makes it throughout the world. And if you factor the fact that we have a significant Arab diaspora as well, that shows that there's something wrong in terms of what we're doing. And I think we're recognizing that. I think the GCC and the Arab world is recognizing that. And there's a lot of investment going on within the entertainment sector as well. Yeah. Especially if you factor in now today, the world is, the entertainment industry is traveling anywhere in the world, looking for places to shoot, looking for places to shoot their productions. People are moving all the way as far as Bulgaria and Hungary to shoot their productions. I think we have the ability to attract international production, but more importantly, as a result of that, we have the ability, if harnessed properly, which is I think what we're doing right now, to create the right industry to harness our creative talent, to be able to create our Lupin, to be able to create our Money Heist, to be able to create our Shogun. I mean, Shogun today is has achieved record-breaking achievement in terms of the Emmy Awards. And regardless of whatever, it's a Japanese story.
Yeah. So Hassan, I'll ask some of the audience to ask a question on that theme. But let me, in the meantime, ask you a question. So you and I talked about sports cluster earlier.
Yes.
Sports as an industry. We have several investors here. I see the the Vice Chairman of Investcorp here, Shane from Shuruk. So the question to you on the sports side is, sports and industry, how does this industry create value? How do sports teams create value? If you look at the NBA in the US, it's like a multi-billion-dollar industry. What's the opportunity in Qatar and the region in that area?
You mean, well, there's two things that you've got to differentiate, right? I mean, the sporting industry, generally speaking, actually, it's sports or anything else. It's, it's the creation of. All right, it's a loaded question, so let me put it this way. I think the sporting industry, generally, for our part of the world, is how do you create enough of a product or a valuable product that retains its value, that allows for a responsibly fiscal policy to be implemented at it and has a knock-on effect within the industry, right? And I say that specifically because I've got a view in terms of football, for example, that maybe a lot of people might not look at, because I think the NBA or American sporting projects or IP is very different to anywhere else in the world. Again, the NBA, for example, continually increases in value. The NFL continually increases value. Even baseball continually increases in value, and MLS and so on, because they have a very unique model that's very specific to them. But if you're going to look at what they've excelled in, is storytelling. It's in essence the ability to create a narrative that creates this valuable connection to them, while at the same time also ensuring a very responsible fiscal policy that does not burden the teams themselves or overburden the teams themselves, as opposed to football. The footballing industry, I think, in my opinion, has, in the years to come, it's going to face challenges, generally speaking. That's my view globally in terms of where the football industry is. I think today there's a lot of content when it comes to football, a lot of tournaments. For the average football fan, you're not exactly very clear about what you're watching, if you're watching the Champions League, if you're watching the Nations League, if you're watching qualifiers. And I think, again, football will always be football, but there's a potential for the growth and value never to be able to achieve what the NBA has been able to achieve in the latest broadcasting rights or the latest NFL rights. But let me just finish this. When it comes to the sporting industry, however, for our part of the world, what our opportunity is in creating our own hosting, specifically in the hosting side, and utilizing these hosting events to be to be a Kickstarter or an accelerant for our policies, whatever they may be. So, for example, you're hosting major sporting events. How do you ensure that this major sporting event, like I said, becomes a North Star? How do you get every stakeholder in the country to move towards utilizing and extracting the most amount of benefit out of it, so that there's a knock-on effect? So when you're hosting every sporting event, it cannot be we're hosting it just for the sake of the event. It's got to fit in with everything else. It's got to be like a symphony. We're hosting the basketball tournament today, now. In 4 years' time, we're hosting another event. How does this event create a cluster around it? How does this event empower the private sector? How does this event empower policies and procedures that are needed? And then how does this move on towards the next event? And then the next event builds upon the success of the previous event. It's basically, you've got to look at it as a step, or like I said, as a symphony in terms of every sporting event hosts or creates its own unique value.
And so you're saying creation of the brand along with the team and the event, right? That's ultimately the value creation.
Like I said, there's two different, it's two different models. The NBA and everything else that's happening in the U.S. is a different model towards what we're doing. The way I see it, the GCC specifically is set to host major sporting events, creating your own sporting event that creates a brand. And maybe Saudi's set for that when it comes to their league. I think Saudi's much more set, in that regards when it comes to the league. But I think other GCC, or the general GCC status is hosting major sporting events and making them, and like the minister, for example, from Bahrain mentioned, the Formula One, that launches a few other ancillary industries. The World Cup, it launches a few other ancillary industries. That's where in my opinion, that's where our strong point is. NBA, NFL, all that's a whole different model that the U.S. has.
Any questions from the audience? Take one or two questions.
Your Excellency, thank you. My name is Moritz Ludwig. I'm a Georgetown student. I'm German myself, so talking about the 2022 World Cup kind of cuts deep, as we were cut out in the group phase.
Sorry about that.
But let's not talk about that. You mentioned that there was no blueprint for this World Cup, that there was also this global campaign, and I was wondering, like in hindsight, with the knowledge you have right now, what would you have done differently? What would you do better now? Yeah.
You see, everybody keeps asking me that question. I always come up with different answers. But the reality is, again, we succeeded. We were able to tick off every promise that we made. So it's very difficult for me to come tell you today what I would have done differently. From a personal level, maybe there are things that I would have done, I would have addressed differently at certain points in time. There came times when the global campaign was extremely difficult, both on a professional and a personal level, and making sure to motivate everybody. And at times, I think, I could have maybe motivated the team slightly differently or been around slightly differently in certain areas. That's from a personal growth level. From a tournament basis, I think it's very difficult to go back in hindsight and look at it and say I would have done something differently. Purely because it ended up being successful, right? I mean, if it wasn't successful, I might come back and give you a long list. But today, what we did led to the success of the tournament. There was a lot of obstacles and a lot of challenges that we faced at different points in time. I'm very proud to say that the team, the team handled it phenomenally well. Again, we created an organization which is the very grandiosely named Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy. I keep cracking this joke. People don't like me to crack this joke, but we sound like a cult. And for a while we were. But the team was able to handle it very, phenomenally well. And the great thing about it was, we were one team, but at the same time, to a certain extent, also in silos. When we needed to work in silos, we worked in silos, so that people did not get affected by other things. So, for example, when the campaign happened, we had the comms team very diligently fighting against what was going on, while at the same time, for example, the technical team continued managing stakeholders, constructing stadiums, ensuring that we comply with worker welfare standards to the highest level. On operational side, the team developing the operational capability and continually working with stakeholders to put in the operational plan. And what we were able to achieve was what I would say the biggest success of our tournament from within Qatar was we showed our ability to be resourceful and resilient. Like, forget everything else that we said, forget the blueprint, forget the plans, all that stuff, you can throw it out the window. The best thing about us was we were resourceful, we were resilient. Whatever fire came out, we knew how to put it out. Whatever fire that came out, we knew how to work together. And at times, I'll tell you, at times we didn't want to see each other's faces, true, but we knew how to work together towards putting out those fires. And that's why I would not change a single thing, just because of that ability that I feel very proud that, it's not just the World Cup that brought it, maybe it harnessed it, but Qatar is just known for being resourceful and resilient at the most challenging of times.
Hello, my name is Elena, and I'm a student at Georgetown University, DC. I had a question about the kind of collaboration of the GCC countries in promoting entertainment, hospitality, and tourism, and specifically Qatar's unique advantage in hosting these events, and whether or not you see perhaps a little bit of competition within the GCC for securing these kind of major sporting and entertainment contracts.
Competition, yes, there's obviously always going to be a competition, but I think it's a healthy competition. It's a healthy competition that complements each other. It's not necessarily that we're competing against each other. The idea is to complement each other more than anything else. And I think we all realize, and we've realized for quite a while, that we need to kind of work together towards lifting each other up. And so, we hosted, for example, the World Cup in 2022. Saudi is bidding to host the 2034 World Cup. Now we're working together towards, passing whatever knowledge that we have and whatever experience that we may have towards also this, to Saudi Arabia. They've looked towards, lessons learned, like any other tournament should do or any host should do. But there's a strong collaboration in that regards. There's a strong push, obviously, for Saudi towards, attracting tourism. And the way we see it, it's not, would you travel to Saudi or would you travel to Qatar? The idea now, and I think, His Excellency Saad Al-Kharji, the chairman of the Qatar Tourism Authority, also said it himself. Rather than saying, either or, it's and. If you're visiting Saudi, why don't you then pass by Qatar? Why don't you go down to Muscat? Why don't you go down to Bahrain? For a lot of people today, traveling to this part of the world, it's not necessarily a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but it might not be the easy trip that a lot of people would see. But so when you come here, why limit yourself to one country? And when you come over here, Saudi will be promoting people to visit Qatar. Qatar will be promoting for people to visit Dubai. Dubai will be promoting to visit Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, and so on. So it's not a competition, rather a complementary initiative. Obviously, within it, you will find maybe a little competition in certain places and certain things. It's only natural. But it's not to the extent that it would cannibalize our growth. We see that we will, the only way for it to be sustainable is for us to grow together.
So, Excellency, we're out of time, so we'll maybe ask you.
One last question?
Okay, one last question, at his request.
Just because I saw her lift her hand up, and I'm sorry, I spoke a lot, so I got to give her a chance.
Hi, thank you so much for your time today. My name is Zoe Niazi, and I am also an undergraduate student at Georgetown University. I wanted to touch on what you said about the Arab passion for storytelling and inquire on what you would identify as some of the challenges that the region faces in Arab inclusion in the media industry, and what specific steps that Qatar needs to take to break into this industry.
You mean globally?
Yes.
I think, look, the challenges that... I think stereotyping, let's put it that way, when it comes to, characters being played, I think there's a significant swing, right? Either people are taking it to one side and stereotyping Arabs, immigrants and so on, or whatever it may be on the evil side of things, or trying to adhere to a more appealing narrative, so you go to the other side, right? Making us seem very out of character towards our Arab heritage or whatever it may be on the other side. I think the biggest challenge in the global industry is that people fail to realize that we're just like everybody else. We've got our culture that we're very proud of, and it should be present. Our characters should not necessarily be stereotyped based on our ethnicity. If we're put in a story, we shouldn't necessarily be put in a story with that kind of, trying to pigeonhole us in a certain place to tick that Arab diversity or Arab inclusion. We should be considered a normal character like any other character in there. That's one side when we're talking about Arab individuals in the industry over there. I think there are still, nevertheless, some people that have achieved quite significant positioning within the world now. For example, again, you've got Rami Youssef, you've got Rami Malek, within the industry itself, Mahad Dakhil, for example, from CAA, who's quite a senior person within CAA as well, and so you've got people that are making strides within the industry. Karim Amr, as a director and producer. I think from our side, to be able to get our content to the outside world, what we need to do is pick up on our capability in terms of the quality of our storytelling. We had it previously. Today, the quality of our storytelling, if you compare it to, for example, what comes out of Korea, what comes out of anywhere in the world, even, Turkey has been able to develop its own storytelling in a way, and it's traveled. Korea has been able to do that. India and Bombay, not only Bollywood, but Tollywood as well, Southern Indian film industry as well, quite extensively has been able to achieve that. Our storytelling capabilities, whether it's in terms of screenwriting, production value, it still isn't to that level that I think it could achieve. Having said that, over the last 30, 40 years, if you're going to ask me personally, some of the best top 10 actors or actresses, I've got at least 3 or 4 Arab actors or actresses. You're going to tell me about my favorite movies from a storytelling perspective, top 20, you've got at least 4 or 5 Arab movies. Maybe not many from the current era, from previous years, which means that you've got that talent available. You've got that ability available. What we need to do now is upgrade that. Our screenwriting has to become better. Our ability when it comes to directing, moving from shot to shot, blocking, there's a lot of this technicalities that needs to be improved. And that's where I think we need to all work together to creating the right ecosystem, attract international production to this part of the world, by osmosis and by interaction, create that exposure. At the same time, harness through initiatives where we train people to improve that capability, while at the same time staying true and honest to our stories and our capabilities.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So I want to thank you for your time today. Great conversation. I also think that in a few years, this country and many will look back at the 2022 World Cup as a change in the trajectory of the region on the dimension you just outlined.
I'm hoping I'm remembered for more than 2022, but yes.
So God mentioned the dip here. I think you remember that as well. Right?
Thank you very much.
With that, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience as well. Thank you. All right, I'd like to welcome Salman Khalid, Managing Director of BNP Paribas, to moderate a discussion on industries of the future. And just continuing with the sports discussion and the sports analogy, and you heard F1 racing. In motor racing, there's this notion that when you want to actually, you're a race car driver, you want to overtake, you overtake at the curve. And the curve is when there's a lot of change happening. The tires are squealing, the acceleration is different, the differential is working. And Salman's going to talk about the overtaking at the curve in the context of industries in the region and what the past held and what the future will bring. Salman, please invite your panel as well. We'll add a chair to this stage as well.